The Silent Code of Manners. Welcome to another calm journey through history. Before we begin, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let your thoughts slow down. Tonight, we're stepping back into a world where silence spoke louder than words, the world of Victorian England. If you enjoy slow storytelling where history unfolds like a dream and every moment feels alive, don't forget to subscribe, tap the bell, and save this video to your Calm History playlist. Each week, we uncover the human stories behind centuries past, told softly, patiently, and truthfully. Now, close your eyes. Imagine London in the late 1800s. Gas lamps glowing in the fog, horses' hooves clattering over cobblestone streets, and behind every polished window, people performing their parts in a grand, unspoken play. Because in the Victorian world, everything had a rule. Not just how to speak or dress, but how to exist. Welcome to another calm journey through history. Before we begin, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let your thoughts slow down. Tonight, we're stepping back into a world where silence spoke louder than words, the world of Victorian England. If you enjoy slow storytelling, where history unfolds like a dream and every moment feels alive, don't forget to subscribe, tap the bell, and save this video to your Calm History playlist. Each week, we uncover the human stories behind centuries past, told softly, patiently, and truthfully. Now, close your eyes. Imagine London in the late 1800s. Gas lamps glowing in the fog, horses' hooves clattering over cobblestone streets, and behind every polished window, people performing their parts in a grand, unspoken play. Because in the Victorian world, everything had a rule. Not just how to speak or dress, but how to exist. The silent rules of society. There were words that could never be said, glances that had to be perfectly timed, gestures that carried meaning even when lips stayed closed. The entire empire ran on invisible strings, a social code so detailed that breaking it could ruin a reputation overnight. For the Victorians, manners weren't just politeness, they were survival. Imagine you are standing in a crowded drawing room, the chandeliers glittering overhead, the hum of conversation like music. A man enters, his coat brushed, boots shining, expression perfectly calm. He bows, but not too deeply. His eyes never wander. His smile is measured. One gesture too bold and whispers would begin before the hour was over. A lady sits by the window. She speaks softly, never interrupts, never lets her laughter rise too loud. Even how she holds her teacup is a signal of upbringing. Thumb and forefinger only, the handle tilted just right. Too tight a grip, and she looks anxious. Too loose, and she appears careless.
Every motion is a message. These weren't formalities invented for beauty. They were boundaries. The Victorian society was obsessed with control, of emotion, of desire, of chaos. To appear calm and proper was to appear moral. To show too much feeling was to risk being seen as weak or worse, indecent. The fear of doing it wrong. The unspoken fear that governed daily life was simple: embarrassment. A dropped glove, a laugh at the wrong moment, a pause too long before replying, each could brand a person as unrefined. Reputation was currency, and gossip was the weapon that guarded it. People practiced their smiles in mirrors, rehearsed their greetings before social events. A young woman could spend days learning the proper way to curtsy. A gentleman would study the science of small talk, perfecting the art of saying much while revealing nothing. And yet, under all this polish lay tension, a quiet, endless pressure to perform. The Victorians lived in a constant state of watching and being watched. Every act was measured, every silence analyzed. In drawing rooms and parlors, where candles flickered and conversations floated like perfume, life became theater. But the audience was merciless. Manners as power. The code of manners was not just about civility, it was about hierarchy. How you greeted someone told the world who was superior and who was not. A woman could not speak first to a man unless he was family or formally introduced. A servant could not address their employer without being spoken to. Even within the same class, subtle differences, the tone of a greeting, the angle of a bow revealed how much power one truly held. And so people learned to read each other like texts. A single raised eyebrow could humiliate. A hesitation before offering a seat could wound deeper than insult. The upper class, for all its wealth, was chained to these rules. The middle class clung to them desperately, using manners as proof that they too belonged. The poor imitated what they could, their politeness often sharper and more sincere than that of their masters. In the end, the rules united everyone through fear. Behind the facade. Yet when the lamps dimmed and the guests departed, the masks slipped. Letters written in secret revealed exhaustion. I am so tired of being proper. Servants watching from doorways saw the cracks, trembling hands, suppressed tears, couples who smiled in public but never spoke in private. Even the Queen herself, Victoria, was not free. She embodied virtue, mourning, duty. But she too was trapped within the image the world demanded. And so, the silent code that defined an era was less about perfection and more about pretending. Pretending to be strong, pretending to be happy, pretending that the weight of expectation didn't crush the heart. The whisper of elegance. Still, there was beauty in that silence. A beauty in the way people moved with care, spoke with grace, lived with intention. Their restraint gave birth to poetry, to letters that confessed love without ever using the word, to gestures so delicate that they could move a soul. The Victorians lived between restraint and longing, between elegance and fear. Every smile, every bow, every glance across a ballroom floor carried centuries of meaning. So, tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine that world again. The flicker of candlelight on glass, the rustle of silk against marble, the murmur of conversation that hides more than it reveals. A world ruled by silence, bound by rules, and haunted by the longing to be free of them.
You've just stepped into the first chapter of our journey through the strict and strange social rules of the Victorian era. In the next story, we'll open another door into the secret world of greetings and conversations where even a single word could decide your fate. Until then, rest well, traveler. History will wait for you. The dress code of respectability. Welcome back. Take a slow breath and let your thoughts settle. Tonight, we move deeper into the Victorian world, where appearances were everything, and every thread of clothing told a story. If you haven't yet, subscribe and save this story for when you want to drift into another time. In this chapter, we'll open the heavy wardrobes of the 19th century and step into a world where fashion was not just a choice. It was a declaration of who you were, what you believed, and where you stood in the social order. In Victorian England, clothing spoke louder than words. A person's garments told others their class, their respectability, even their moral worth. The right fabric, the right cut, the right color, all these things formed the invisible language of social survival. Every morning, the act of dressing was not a matter of comfort, but of performance. To walk into the world was to step onto a stage, and the audience was everyone you met. For men, the rules were rigid and precise. A gentleman's suit had to fit perfectly, his collar starched, his boots polished until they caught the light. His gloves were never removed except when eating or writing, and even then folded neatly beside him. His hat, a bowler, a top hat, or a Homburg, was chosen according to the hour and the occasion. Removing it at the wrong moment could brand him as crude. His tie, or cravat, was tied with mathematical care, a small symbol of self-control. Nothing could appear rushed, nothing could appear careless. Women lived under an even heavier burden of elegance. Every layer of fabric carried meaning. Petticoats, corsets, bustles, skirts, shawls, gloves, and hats, all arranged with careful precision. To be seen in public without gloves was considered improper, even scandalous. To wear too much jewelry suggested vanity, too little suggested poverty. A respectable lady's wardrobe was both armor and prison. Beneath it, she could scarcely breathe, yet without it, she was unprotected from judgment. The corset was the ultimate symbol of respectability. It shaped the body into a silhouette that whispered discipline and control. A straight spine, a narrow waist, and graceful posture, all signs that a woman knew her place. Mothers began training their daughters young, tightening the laces inch by inch until standing itself became a feat of endurance. The fainting couch, often mocked today, was not luxury but necessity. The human body was simply not designed for such constraint. Color, too, had its laws. Dark shades for morning, pale hues for youth, deep reds or blues for evening. A widow in her first year of grief wore only black, and even the trimming of her dress was dictated by etiquette books. A married woman could not wear the same bright tones as a debutante, and heaven forbid a servant should mimic her mistress's style. Every thread reinforced the hierarchy. Yet behind this rigid order was an obsession with cleanliness and control. The truly respectable did not merely dress well, they kept their clothing spotless in a world filled with dust, soot, and rain. Servants spent hours brushing coats, mending hems, and laundering endless layers of linen. The gleam of a gentleman's cuff or the crispness of a lady's collar was a silent announcement: I am civilized. To appear wrinkled or untidy was to risk being mistaken for someone of lower class. Tailors and dressmakers became silent architects of status. They were the unseen creators of illusion, turning fabric into symbols of success. A single mistake, a crooked seam, a loose thread, could shame an entire household. For the working poor, clothing was often secondhand, altered and re-altered until it barely resembled the original. But even they tried to follow the fashions of the day, for in appearance lay hope. Behind closed doors, however, people longed to escape the rules that bound their wardrobes. Diaries from the era tell of women loosening corsets at night, finally breathing freely in private. Men complained of stiff collars that scratched their skin raw. Comfort was considered weakness, endurance was elegance. Even in their own homes, many continued the performance, afraid that a surprise visitor might see them improperly dressed. There were those who rebelled, quietly. Artists, writers, and reformers began to question the tyranny of fashion. Some women joined the rational dress movement, advocating looser garments and healthier silhouettes. Others whispered about freedom, about walking without laces biting into flesh, about living without fear of disgrace. But change came slowly. The old ways held fast, wrapped tight as the corsets themselves. Still, the beauty of the Victorian wardrobe cannot be denied. The rustle of silk across a ballroom floor, the soft gleam of lamplight on satin, the faint perfume of lavender and starch, all created a world that shimmered on the surface, even as it suffocated beneath. Every costume, every accessory, every carefully tied ribbon told the same story. Perfection demanded sacrifice. As the century waned, the world began to loosen its grip. The corsets eased, the colors brightened, and individuality began to stir beneath the lace. Yet the ghosts of those rules linger even today, in the way we dress for respect, the way we judge what others wear, the way appearance still whispers worth before a word is spoken. So tonight, as you drift toward west, imagine the quiet rustle of Victorian fabric, the flicker of gaslight on glass buttons, the soft creak of corset stays in the dark. Every stitch, every layer, every shimmer of silk was more than fashion. It was identity, woven tight into the fabric of an age that worshipped appearance above all. And in our next chapter, we'll step beyond the wardrobe and into the drawing rooms and parlors where those appearances were tested. There, beneath polite smiles and perfect manners, we will see the deeper truth, the prison of gender that ruled both men and women in the Victorian era. For now, rest your thoughts and let the elegance of that distant world fade softly into sleep. Courtship and the art of flirting. Welcome back. As the lamps dim and the city outside grows quiet, imagine the soft glow of candlelight flickering through lace curtains. Tonight, we enter one of the most delicate and forbidden corners of the Victorian world, the world of love. Not the love we know today, but a quieter, secret kind, spoken through glances, gestures, and letters sealed with trembling hands. If you enjoy these calm journeys through time, remember to subscribe and keep this story close for the nights when you wish to drift into another age. Now, let's step into the heart of the 19th century, where romance was not freedom, but performance. In the Victorian era, courtship was a battlefield disguised as a dance. Every smile, every word, every pause was calculated. Love was something to be earned carefully under the watchful eyes of parents, chaperones, and society itself. Men and women rarely met alone. A walk in the garden might be allowed, but only with a companion a few paces behind. A letter could be sent, but only if it passed through the hands of family. Even the most innocent contact carried risk, for affection in this world was both sacred and scandalous. A lady could never openly pursue a man, she could only be pursued. Her task was to signal interest without ever showing desire. A flutter of a fan, the way she turned her head, the briefest glance across a ballroom, all became a coded language that only the observant could understand. Manuals of etiquette taught these gestures with precision: how to drop a glove without seeming clumsy, how to glance away just long enough to suggest modest curiosity. The fan itself became a secret instrument of emotion. Held open in one hand, it said, "Wait." Rested against the cheek, it whispered, "I love you." Closed with a snap, "Leave me." Men, too, were bound by the same quiet choreography. A gentleman could not speak of affection unless he was prepared to offer marriage. To confess love without intention was considered dishonorable. And so, men learned to express admiration through actions rather than words. A flower left at a doorstep, a book borrowed and returned with a folded note, a shared smile across a crowded drawing room. Even letters, the most private form of communication, followed a strict code. A young lady could never write first. When she replied, her handwriting, her ink, even the spacing of her words were analyzed for meaning. A too quick response might seem eager, too slow, disinterested. Every line balanced on the edge between affection and propriety. And should such letters ever be found, their contents could destroy reputations forever. But beneath all this restraint, emotion burned fiercely. The very act of repression gave romance its intensity. The longing glance across a ballroom, the brushed hand while passing a teacup, the unspoken understanding between two souls surrounded by silence, these became moments of unbearable tension. It was love distilled to its essence, fragile, dangerous, alive. In many cases, courtship was not just emotional, but strategic. Marriage determined status, wealth, and future security. Parents negotiated matches behind closed doors, weighing titles against dowries. A woman's beauty, charm, and reputation were her currency. A man's fortune, education, and family name determined his worth. Yet even within this calculated system, true affection could bloom, often in secret, often against the will of those in power. Still, for most, marriage was less about love and more about survival. A woman without a husband had little protection or independence. Her choices were few, her freedom nearly non-existent. To marry well was to secure a place in society. To marry poorly, or not at all, was to fall into quiet obscurity. Many young women wrote in diaries of the terror of being overlooked, of watching their youth fade while their future remained uncertain. And yet, there were small rebellions. Lovers met in secret gardens, exchanged poems, and found ways to speak when words were forbidden. A note slipped into a glove, a ribbon tied in a particular color, a whispered goodbye after a dance. These were the cracks in the armor of decorum. Behind every polite smile, hearts beat fast with things they could never say. The tragedy of Victorian courtship lay not in the lack of love, but in the impossibility of expressing it. To feel too deeply was to risk scandal. To confess too soon was to lose everything. And so, love became a game of endurance, of patience, courage, and restraint. Still, some stories ended in happiness. Couples who endured the long, cautious rituals often found a kind of love that was steadfast, built on respect and trust. Their affection, though hidden from public view, lasted quietly through decades. Others were less fortunate. Love letters burned, engagements broken, lives divided by class, religion, or reputation. As the 19th century drew to a close, the old rules began to fade. The modern world crept in, faster, freer, more forgiving. Yet the memory of those secret gestures remained. The thrill of a glance, the weight of an unspoken word, the grace of patience. These things lingered, reminders of a time when love was not loud, but whispered. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the soft music of a Victorian ballroom. Picture couples moving in perfect time, faces calm but hearts racing beneath layers of silk and wool. Hear the rustle of skirts, the murmur of voices, the quiet longing in the air. This was how love survived in a world of rules, quietly, beautifully, defiantly. When next we meet, we will step from the shimmer of romance into the darker side of the era, into scandal, shame, and the price of breaking the code. For in the Victorian world, one mistake could cost not just reputation, but a lifetime. Until then, rest and let the echoes of that forbidden love carry you softly into sleep. Dining, decorum, and the ritual of meals. Welcome back. The fire is low, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and candle wax. Tonight, we step into one of the most refined and ritualized moments of the Victorian world, the meal. But this was no simple act of nourishment. To dine in the 19th century was to perform, to reveal one's breeding, manners, and moral standing with every gesture. If you haven't yet, subscribe and save this story to your Calm History playlist. Then settle into the quiet and imagine a long table lit by flickering candles, silver polished to a mirror, and faces composed into masks of perfect civility. For the Victorians, the dinner table was a stage on which every guest played a role. From the moment you entered the dining room, everything you did was watched. The way you bowed to your host, the way you held your napkin, the sound of your voice as you greeted others. Each was a silent test of refinement. There were rules for standing, rules for sitting, rules even for silence. The true purpose of dinner was not eating, but demonstrating that you belonged. When the master of the house gave the signal, conversation began, soft and measured. No one spoke loudly. No one spoke out of turn. It was considered vulgar to talk across the table, and disastrous to interrupt a person of higher rank. Topics were chosen with care: art, music, the weather, a recent charity event. Anything political, emotional, or controversial was forbidden. Even laughter was restrained. A lady's voice was to remain low, her smile demure, her hands still. Etiquette books of the period filled pages with instructions. Never season your food before tasting it. It implies mistrust of the cook. Never touch the salt directly. Always use a spoon. Do not cut your bread with a knife. Do not blow on soup, no matter how hot. Do not look at others while eating. Never, under any circumstance, speak of bodily functions, illness, or anything that might disturb the appetite. The meal, in essence, was not about food. It was about control. Servants, gliding silently between guests, maintained the illusion of ease. They refilled glasses, removed plates, and replaced cutlery with a precision born of fear. A dropped fork could draw a frown from the host, a smirk from a rival guest. For them, mistakes carried heavier consequences. One servant dismissed, one family reputation blemished, one quiet life undone. The seating arrangement, too, was a map of hierarchy. The most honored guests sat nearest the host and hostess, while the less important found themselves further down the table, their chances of being heard diminishing with distance. To be placed close to the head was to be seen, and being seen meant existing in society's eyes. Those at the far ends ate in near silence, performing grace without attention, knowing that one wrong gesture might ensure they were never invited again. For women, the dinner table was both privilege and trap. A lady's role was to appear radiant, charming, and effortless. She was to eat delicately, never fully, never hungrily. A true lady was expected to seem untouched by appetite, as though she lived on conversation and air. A man, meanwhile, could eat heartily, though never greedily. His manner was to be confident, steady, self-contained. The difference between elegance and excess was often just one bite too many. The food itself was elaborate, even extravagant. In grand houses, there might be 10 or 12 courses: soup, fish, roast, pudding, fruit, cheese, all arranged in symmetrical perfection. But the more lavish the meal, the less it was truly enjoyed. No one ate freely. Every motion was deliberate, every expression controlled. Dining was not about pleasure. It was a demonstration of power. Those who could afford to waste food, time, and effort displayed their superiority over those who could not. Yet beneath all the polish, the same anxieties that ruled every other part of Victorian life crept in. Guests worried about saying the wrong thing, using the wrong fork, revealing too much eagerness. Some barely ate, too nervous to lift their eyes from their plates. The tension of perfection hung in the air, so thick that even the soft clatter of china seemed loud. And as the wine flowed, so did whispers of alliances, of flirtations, of secrets too fragile to be spoken in daylight. After dinner, the ritual continued. The men withdrew to smoke cigars and discuss business or politics, while the women moved to the drawing room for tea and gentle conversation. Each group maintained its facade. The men, speaking of trade and empire, performed strength. The women, sipping from porcelain cups, performed virtue.
But behind both acts lay the same exhaustion, the endless work of pretending. Even in private, the rules lingered. Families followed miniature versions of these rituals at home. Children were trained from a young age to eat quietly, to thank the cook, to keep their elbows off the table. Working-class families mimicked the manners of their betters, believing civility might lift them a little higher. Across every class, the table became a symbol of aspiration, of order in a chaotic world. But the truth was simpler. Beneath the linen and the lace, beneath the silver and the soft voices, people were hungry, not just for food, but for freedom. To speak openly, to laugh without fear, to eat without thinking. The meal that was meant to unite so often divided, reminding everyone of where they stood. As the candles burn low and the last course is cleared, imagine that table once more. The gleam of silver, the hum of polite conversation, the air heavy with perfume, smoke, and unspoken thought. The dinner ends, the guests rise, the masks remain. Next time, we will leave this glittering world and step into the shadows behind it. The world of moral strictness and hypocrisy, where purity was worshipped and desire forbidden. There, in the quiet spaces between virtue and sin, we will find the heart of the Victorian soul. For now, let the echoes of crystal and china fade into stillness and rest.
The shadow of morality. Welcome back. The lamps burn low, and a faint chill drifts through the quiet room. Tonight, we move from the bright, glittering world of civility into its darker mirror, the realm of morality, where purity was praised, sin was feared, and the line between virtue and hypocrisy blurred until no one could tell where truth began or ended. Take a breath and imagine the world we're entering, a world that preached restraint yet lived in contradiction, a world obsessed with appearances, where goodness was measured not by compassion but by silence. In Victorian England, morality was not a private matter. It was a performance, a constant display of virtue. To be seen as respectable was more important than being kind, honest, or just. Every act, every expression, every choice was weighed against invisible expectations. The moral code of the era was woven into daily life, in church, in literature, in the home. People did not simply live, they justified their existence through the lens of morality. Respectable women were expected to embody innocence. They were to be modest in dress, soft in tone, and ignorant of anything worldly. Even mentioning the body, its desires, its pain, was considered improper. Doctors described female patients as delicate, fragile creatures. Literature painted them as pure angels or fallen sinners, with nothing in between. Men, on the other hand, were given more freedom, yet were told to uphold moral authority as fathers, husbands, employers, and judges. The double standard was vast, and it defined every relationship. Public morality, however, rarely matched private behavior. While society celebrated chastity and modesty, London's hidden streets told another story. Brothels flourished. Gin houses stayed open all night. Behind the walls of fine homes, secrets festered. Affairs, addictions, cruelty, despair. The same men who condemned immorality in the newspapers often sought it in private. The same women who fainted at scandal read novels full of it by candlelight. This hypocrisy became one of the great paradoxes of the age. The Victorians built their world upon repression, the belief that denying temptation was proof of strength. But what they truly built was tension. The more people hid their impulses, the more those impulses defined them. Writers like Dickens, Bronte, and Wilde began to expose the cracks in the moral armor. Beneath the polished manners and sermons on virtue, they saw loneliness, shame, and the slow decay of the spirit. Religion played its part. The church held enormous influence, shaping public values and private guilt. Sin was not just an act, it was a thought, a whisper, a glance. Salvation required constant vigilance. To fall from grace, even briefly, was to risk eternal damnation. For the poor, morality became a weapon used by the powerful. Charity was often given conditionally, with lectures on sobriety and gratitude. For the rich, morality was proof of superiority. Their virtue was not measured by sacrifice, but by the appearance of purity. And yet there were cracks of light within the shadow. Some reformers began to speak against hypocrisy. They founded charities for the sick, the orphaned, and the destitute, not for moral glory, but from genuine compassion. Writers began to question the cruelty of judgment. Women began to question why their worth was tied to purity, while men's sins were forgiven as nature. Slowly, the idea of morality began to shift from punishment to empathy, though not fast enough for those crushed beneath its weight. For most Victorians, however, the shadow was inescapable. A woman who laughed too loudly, a man who cried in public, a servant who spoke his mind, all were seen as moral failures. The fear of being perceived as unrefined or improper kept society in perfect submission. People learned to smile when they were breaking, to pray when they were angry, to whisper their truths only to the night. The greatest cost of this false morality was emotional starvation. Families lived together without ever truly knowing one another. Children grew up believing that love was a reward for obedience, not a birthright. Women suffered in silence from illness or depression, told their sadness was sin. Men hid their doubts behind cold authority, afraid of seeming weak. Everyone played their part, and no one was free. By the end of the century, cracks began to show. Scandals involving politicians, clergymen, and social leaders revealed the hypocrisy that many had long suspected. The old gods of propriety began to tremble. A new kind of morality was emerging, one that valued truth over appearance, humanity over perfection. But the ghosts of the past lingered. Even now, echoes of that Victorian shadow still reach us. In the judgment of others, in the fear of vulnerability, in the quiet shame that follows honesty. So, tonight, as you drift toward rest, picture the flicker of a candle burning beside a window, its light trembling against the dark. Inside, a family prays, smiles, and says the right words, while each carries a secret they dare not speak. Outside, fog rolls through the streets, swallowing the sound of distant footsteps. A city full of secrets, bound by the illusion of virtue. In our next chapter, we'll look at how this same morality created invisible walls between classes, how wealth, status, and birth shaped not only a person's opportunities, but their worth in the eyes of society. Close your eyes now and let the last traces of that strict and haunted world dissolve into silence.
Class and the invisible divide. Welcome back. The night is still
and the echo of church bells fades into the fog. Tonight, we step into the quiet spaces that divided Victorian England, not through walls of stone, but through barriers of class, so powerful that even dreams were separated by them. Take a slow breath and picture the world we're about to enter. The drawing rooms of the wealthy, glowing with firelight and gold. The narrow streets of the poor, where smoke clings to the air and hope feels thin. The same city, the same century, yet two entirely different worlds. In Victorian England, class was not just a social category, it was destiny. From the moment a child took its first breath, the future was already written. For the upper class, life began in soft beds and ended in marble tombs. For the working poor, it began in crowded alleys and ended, more often than not, in the same. The distance between these worlds could be measured in steps, but not in reach. The upper classes ruled from behind velvet curtains. Their wealth came from land, trade, and inheritance, fortunes built by the labor of those they rarely saw. They lived in houses so large that some family members could go days without crossing paths. Servants filled every hallway, their footsteps silent, their presence invisible. To be born into this world was to inherit not just money, but the illusion that one's worth was divine, a reflection of moral superiority. The middle class, rising and anxious, tried desperately to imitate them. Merchants, clerks, factory managers, they worked to appear refined, dressing as the wealthy did, reading etiquette manuals to learn the right words, gestures, and tones. Respectability was their armor. They believed that through discipline and propriety, they could climb the ladder of success. But for all their effort, the upper class never let them forget where they came from. No amount of polish could wash away the scent of labor. And then, beneath them all, were the poor. They were the hands that built, washed, carried, and cleaned, yet their existence was treated as a moral failing. Poverty, to the Victorians, was not tragedy, it was evidence of sin. The poor were told that their suffering was God's punishment for laziness or vice. Workhouses were built to reform them, though inside, life was crueler than the streets. Men and women were separated, children torn from parents, and labor replaced compassion. In the cities, thousands lived shoulder to shoulder in tenements, rooms damp with rot and smoke. Disease was constant, hunger unending. They saw the fine carriages roll past their doors, carrying people who spoke of charity but never looked them in the eye. For them, the invisible divide was not abstract. It was hunger, humiliation, the daily reminder that the world was built to keep them in place. Yet, strangely, the classes depended on each other completely. The rich could not live without their servants. The poor could not live without their wages. A maid polished the silver she would never use. A butler poured wine he could never afford to taste. A seamstress stitched dresses for ladies who would never learn her name. In the grand homes of London and the countryside, the lower classes existed in the shadows, ghosts keeping the machinery of gentility running. Inside those walls, servants learned to move unseen. They rose before dawn, cleaned rooms they would never sleep in, and ate scraps left from the table of those who called themselves virtuous. They overheard secrets, saw tears, smelled the whiskey on trembling hands. Yet they kept silent, for silence was survival. Their loyalty was expected, but never rewarded. And any small rebellion, a glance, a word, a hesitation, could end their livelihood. For those above, ignorance was its own comfort. The wealthy spoke of moral order, of divine design, of how everyone had their place.
To them, the servant's humility proved the rightness of the world. Charity, when given, came wrapped in condescension. A coin tossed to a beggar bought the giver's peace of mind more than it eased the beggar's hunger. Writers and reformers tried to pierce the illusion. Charles Dickens wrote of the cruelty of factories, the hunger of children, the indifference of wealth. His stories exposed what polite society preferred not to see: the cost of progress, the human lives ground beneath it. But even as his novels stirred sympathy, few were willing to change. Empathy was entertainment, and outrage rarely left the parlor. Still, there were moments when the walls cracked. In times of crises, epidemics, fires, strikes, the classes briefly met face to face. Fear made them equal for a heartbeat. But when the danger passed, the divide returned, as if nature itself demanded separation. By the end of the century, the world began to shift. The working class organized, the middle class grew bolder, and the aristocracy trembled beneath the weight of its own decadence. But the scars remained. The sense that one's value could be measured by birth, income, or address did not vanish. It simply changed shape. So tonight, as you rest, imagine London once more. The fog thick and gray, the lamps glowing in rows, the faint sound of carriage wheels echoing through narrow streets. Somewhere, a lady draws her curtains, safe in her warm room. A child in the alley below pulls his blanket tighter, listening to the same bells she hears. They live in the same city, breathe the same air, yet their worlds will never touch. In our next chapter, we'll explore the final cost of that perfection, the toll it took on the soul, the endless strain of obedience, of pretending, of living not as one is, but as one must be. We'll step into the quiet melancholy at the end of the age, the cost of appearing flawless. For now, close your eyes and let the city fade, its lights dissolving into the mist, leaving only the echo of footsteps that never meet.
The cost of perfection. Welcome back. Tonight we reach the end of our journey through the strict and strange world of the Victorian era, a world of grace and guilt, elegance and repression, brilliance and silence. Before we begin, take one last quiet breath and let the air settle around you. Imagine the soft flicker of candlelight fading across a drawing room, the ticking of a clock in the distance, and the faint scent of rosewater and smoke. The people we've met along the way are still there, the careful ladies, the solemn gentlemen, the servants who move like ghosts. But tonight, we step behind all of them, beyond the manners and masks, to see what it truly cost to live in a world obsessed with perfection. For the Victorians, the idea of perfection was not a dream, it was a duty. Every moment of every day was an act of control over the body, the voice, the face, the soul. To be proper was to be safe, to falter was to fall. Their entire society was built upon appearances so polished that even pain had to look graceful. Yet beneath the smooth surface, countless hearts cracked quietly under the weight of expectation. In the homes of the upper class, life was a theater of dignity. A gentleman could never show fear. A lady could never show anger. Parents rarely embraced their children in public. Husbands and wives spoke softly but not tenderly. Everything was wrapped in formality. Emotion pressed down like a wrinkle smoothed from silk. The more polished the exterior, the lonelier the interior became. Behind closed doors, the cost of appearing perfect was measured in silence. For women, the demand was endless. They were expected to embody purity, devotion, and calm no matter what storms raged inside. To feel too deeply was hysteria. To think too freely was rebellion. Many suffered illnesses that had no name then: anxiety, depression, exhaustion, all dismissed as nerves or weakness. Doctors prescribed rest cures that silenced them further, confining them to bedrooms draped in lace. The angel of the house was not allowed to fall from grace, even when she broke beneath the weight of her wings. Men paid their price differently. Their armor was pride. The ideal Victorian man was disciplined, rational, self-reliant. He worked tirelessly, spoke sparingly, and felt little. To express vulnerability was unmanly. To fail was disgrace. Many lived entire lives without admitting pain or fear, drinking quietly at night to dull the ache of pressure. They died young, their hearts weakened not by illness, but by the strain of never being allowed to rest. Even the poor carried this burden in their own way. They were taught to mimic the manners of those above them, to prove their moral worth through obedience. A servant who smiled at the wrong moment risked dismissal. A worker who spoke too boldly risked starvation. Respectability became their only shield against judgment. To be poor was shameful. To appear ungrateful was worse. So they straightened their backs and bowed their heads, pretending not to notice the cruelty of a world that demanded perfection from those who had nothing left to give. Every part of Victorian life revolved around maintaining the illusion that order and virtue ruled the world. But cracks appeared everywhere. In letters that confessed despair, in diaries filled with quiet longing, in art and literature that dared to whisper what society denied. Writers like Thomas Hardy and Oscar Wilde began to strip away the mask. They wrote of passion, hypocrisy, and the quiet tragedies that respectability tried to hide. Their stories scandalized polite society precisely because they were true. Perfection, it turned out, was never pure. It was fragile, brittle as glass. The more people tried to polish their lives, the more easily they shattered. Beneath every rule lay contradiction. A woman was told to be pure yet alluring, modest yet charming, silent yet intelligent. A man was told to be powerful yet gentle, rich yet humble, moral yet indulgent. No one could be all of these things, and so everyone failed in silence. In that silence, small rebellions grew. Women began to read forbidden books, to write letters that spoke of freedom. Artists painted faces that were not beautiful but real. Servants found solidarity in shared hardship. The world that once worshipped obedience began to stir with discontent. And slowly, the age of perfection gave way to something less graceful but more honest. As the 19th century waned, so too did its rigid certainties. The laughter that had once been restrained began to rise. The corsets loosened, the walls between classes and genders cracked. And yet, the ghosts of that perfection never fully disappeared. Even now, we still chase polished images, still measure worth by composure, still hide pain behind smiles. The Victorian obsession with appearing right, even when life feels wrong, lives quietly in us all. So tonight, as our story ends, picture one final scene. A woman sits by a window in London, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outside, fog drifts across the street, swallowing the glow of the gas lamps. Her house is silent. Her family sleeps. She exhales, and for a moment, just a moment, she allows her shoulders to drop, her face to soften. The perfection slips. The mask falls away. She is simply herself, unseen, unjudged, unmeasured. That small exhale, that single moment of truth, is what every person of that age longed for. The freedom to be imperfect, to feel, to rest. But it was a luxury almost none could afford. As you close your eyes, let the world of the Victorians fade. The lace curtains, the ticking clocks, the polite voices drifting through corridors. Behind them lies a simple truth. No society can remain spotless without breaking the hearts of those who live within it. And so ends our story, the strict and strange social rules of the Victorian era, a world of beauty and restraint forever haunted by the cost of its own perfection. Now rest, and let the silence of history carry you gently into sleep.